Ever pondered why economies take a nosedive? Take a moment and think back to Japan in 1989 or the United States in 1929. What caused these economies to crash and burn? The simple answer is deleveraging. Now you might wonder, what's that? Well, deleveraging is when people cut back on spending. And when that happens, incomes fall, credit disappears, asset prices drop, banks find themselves in a tight spot, the stock market crashes, social tensions rise, and the whole thing starts to spiral downwards. It's like a domino effect, where one thing leads to another in a vicious cycle. As incomes fall and debt repayments rise, borrowers find themselves in a pinch. No longer deemed creditworthy, they can no longer borrow enough money to make their debt repayments. They scramble to sell assets, which floods the market. This is when the stock market collapses, the real estate market tanks, and banks find themselves in hot water. As asset prices drop, the value of the collateral borrowers can put up drops. This makes borrowers even less creditworthy. People start to feel poor, credit rapidly disappears. It's a vicious cycle of less spending, less income, less wealth, less credit, and so on. This might sound similar to a recession, but there's a key difference. In a recession, lowering interest rates can stimulate borrowing. However, in a deleveraging, lowering interest rates doesn't work because interest rates are already low and soon hit 0%. So the stimulation ends. In a deleveraging, borrowers' debt burdens have simply gotten too big and can't be relieved by lowering interest rates. Lenders realize that debts have become too large to ever be fully paid back. Borrowers have lost their ability to repay and their collateral has lost value. They feel crippled by the debt. Lenders stop lending. Borrowers stop borrowing. So, how do we tackle a deleveraging? The problem is debt burdens are too high and they must come down. There are 4 ways this can happen. People, businesses, and governments cut their spending. Debts are reduced through defaults and restructurings. Wealth is redistributed from the haves to the have-nots. And finally, the central bank prints new money. Usually, spending is cut first. As we've seen, people, businesses, banks, and even governments tighten their belts and cut their spending so that they can pay down their debt. This is often referred to as austerity. When borrowers stop taking on new debts and start paying down old debts, you might expect the debt burden to decrease. But the opposite happens. Because spending is cut, and one person's spending is another person's income, it causes incomes to fall. They fall faster than debts are repaid, and the debt burden actually gets worse. This leads to the next step. Debts must be reduced. Many borrowers find themselves unable to repay their loans, which are a lender's assets. When borrowers don't repay the bank, people get nervous that the bank won't be able to repay them, so they rush to withdraw their money from the bank. Banks get squeezed, and people, businesses, and banks default on their debts. This severe economic contraction is a depression. So, the next time you wonder why economies crash, remember, it's all about deleveraging. It's a domino effect that starts with reduced spending and ends with a depression. It's a complex process, but understanding it can help us navigate these turbulent financial waters.